The operation was executed with clinical precision and icy administrative efficiency, revealing years of pent-up resentment and meticulous strategic planning. At precisely 8:00 a.m. on May 6, 2026, the heavy oak doors of Windsor Castle's private quarters closed behind the returning Queen Consort, not merely shutting, but sealing the end of an era. Queen Camilla had just returned from a demanding high-stakes state visit to Washington, D.C. Yet the home she stepped into had been fundamentally and perhaps irreversibly rewired in her absence. Inside the castle, the atmosphere was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the celebratory mood that had surrounded the royal couple during their 4 days in the United States. While global media remained absorbed in dissecting the Trump-Windsor Renaissance, marked by 12 standing ovations in Congress and a landmark trade agreement, the true power structure of the British monarchy was being dismantled back in London. The epicenter of this quiet institutional earthquake was the Hall of Matriarchs. For nearly 3 decades, its central western wall had featured a conspicuous, haunting void, the space originally reserved for Diana, Princess of Wales. Since 1997, the spot had remained deliberately empty or occupied only by rotating minor landscapes, a silent act of damnatio memoriae. As Camilla passed through the hall that morning, the unmistakable scent of fresh linseed oil and premium museum-grade gallery wax, reference 402, reserved for the most delicate royal restorations, reached her before her eyes registered the change. In place of the long empty space now hung a commanding oil-on-canvas portrait of Diana, measuring 1.2 by 1.5 meters and set in a heavy gold leaf frame retrieved from secure storage in the Royal Collection Trust's Berkshire vaults. Internal logistics. Records from the Lord Chamberlain's office confirm the portrait was installed under cover of a routine maintenance window that opened at 2:00 a.m. on May 4th. The timing was masterful. At that precise moment, King Charles and Queen Camilla were attending a gala dinner at the White House, their attention fully consumed by diplomatic engagements. The legal instrument that enabled the move was the Regency Act of 1937. This constitutional provision transfers executive powers to councillors of state when the sovereign is abroad, but requires those councillors to be physically present on British soil. By accompanying the king to America, Camilla had inadvertently suspended her own veto power for a critical 96-hour window. Authority rested solely with Prince William and Princess Anne. Palace sources indicate the order was not issued as a personal request, but as a formal administrative directive titled Heritage Optimization Order 2605. The document reclassified the Hall of Matriarchs as a priority sovereignty zone, mandating that any mother of a future king must be represented in the primary visual record of the monarchy. When the Queen Consort demanded the immediate removal of the portrait, she encountered a wall of professional silence. The Master of the Household's office, now operating under the direction of Princess Anne, calmly cited the binding nature of Order 2605. The staff did not answer to the Queen Consort. They answered to the law. The strategic brilliance of Prince William, the same boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin with head bowed, was now unmistakably clear. He had waited nearly 20 years for this moment. He did not strike when the monarchy was vulnerable. He struck when his father was at the peak of his success, basking in the glow of an American diplomatic triumph. By the time the King's plane touched down at RAF Bryce Norton, the visual language of the House of Windsor had been reclaimed. The portrait was secured to the wall with reinforced steel anchors, a physical symbol of the change's permanence. This was no petty family dispute. It was a clinical exercise of institutional power. Princess Anne, still in her morning riding attire, reportedly met Camilla in the hallway and delivered 5 words that carried the weight of finality. It is what Diana deserved. It was not merely a personal opinion. It was the death knell of the eraser era. By 10:02 a.m., internal Twinsatizuri, palace communications between Kensington Palace and the Royal Collection Trust had surged. The message was unambiguous. The restoration was irreversible. The Washington visit had provided the perfect alibi for a bloodless revolution, leaving the king to return to a home where his past had finally caught up with his present. The strategic architecture of this Washington alibi reflected a level of geopolitical foresight that points to high-level coordination. Imagery from the United States portrayed a grand state visit, but its true purpose was to function as an elaborate, geographic and psychological trap for King Charles III and Queen Camilla. To grasp how Prince William and Princess Anne successfully neutralized the monarch's ability to respond, one must examine the tightly orchestrated timeline between May 2 and May 5, 2026. The King and Queen consort landed at Joint Base Andrews at 14:15 on May 2nd, where they were received with full military honors. From that moment onward, their itinerary was managed with extreme rigidity, allowing no opportunity for unscheduled contact with London. Operating under Princess Anne's covert direction, the Master of the Household's office kept the King's private communications team in a state of perpetual logistical disruption. While King Charles prepared to address a joint session of Congress, his primary secure line to Windsor was reportedly undergoing a scheduled encryption upgrade that created a precise 48-hour blackout. On May 3rd, the distraction intensified as Queen Camilla was sent to New York City for a series of high-profile solo engagements. The centerpiece was her visit to the 9/11 Memorial Reflecting Pools, a deliberate move by the Kensington Palace team designed to place her in visual contrast with the late Princess Diana. By encouraging Camilla to embrace the role of global healer, the planners ensured she remained psychologically invested in her public image and success. While Camilla was being photographed comforting survivors in Manhattan, she was thousands of miles removed from the quiet transformation unfolding at Windsor. The most decisive phase of the Washington alibi occurred on May 4th during a private White House lunch. As King Charles and President Donald Trump discussed lifting trade restrictions on luxury exports, a second, more sensitive document was reportedly presented. According to American intelligence sources, this was when the king was briefed on the declassified 1997 Paris files, raw NSA satellite intercepts from the night of the Alma tunnel crash that had been held for nearly 3 decades. The timing was devastating. Any strong reaction from Charles regarding events at Windsor risked the immediate leak of this dossier to the global media. By 16 Août on May 4th, Heritage Optimization Order 2065 was already being executed at Windsor Castle. Under the guise of a simulated security drill, a specialized team of 12 senior curators and structural engineers, vetted months earlier for Operation Motherland, entered the Hall of Matriarchs. Using laser leveling equipment, they positioned the portrait of Diana at precisely the same eye level as that of Queen Elizabeth II. The gallery's lighting was recalibrated with a narrow spectrum, LED designed to make the gold in Diana's hair appear to glow against the dark mahogany paneling, creating an inescapable visual and psychological impact. This was not mere art restoration. It was the deliberate creation of a shrine. The team used permanent bonding adhesive on the structural anchors, ensuring the portrait could not be removed without damaging the gallery wall itself. Simultaneously, Princess Anne handled the human dimension of the operation. She personally oversaw the reassignment of 3 senior palace aides known for their loyalty to Queen Camilla, dispatching them on an emergency inventory audit to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh, effectively isolating them from the Windsor decision loop. By the time the king and queen boarded their return flight on the evening of May 5th, the internal administration of Windsor Castle had been completely purged of Camilla's influence. The genius of the Washington alibi was that it weaponized the king's own diplomatic triumph against him. Charles believed he had achieved the greatest success of his reign by strengthening the special relationship and earning acclaim as a global leader. Returning home to wage a domestic battle over a portrait would mean admitting he had lost control of his own household while supposedly leading on the world stage. Prince William had correctly calculated that his father would ultimately prioritize the crown's reputation over his wife's personal comfort. Internal logs from the Lord Chamberlain's office confirm that at 22 hours on May 5th, while the royal aircraft was mid-Atlantic, the final electronic locks were installed on the Hall of Matriarchs. Entry codes were changed, and master keys were restricted to only two individuals, the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal. The Queen Consort was returning to a fortress in which she no longer held the keys. These 96 hours marked the most significant shift in royal power dynamics since the abdication of 1936. It served as a masterclass in how geography and precise timing can upend the traditional power structure of the monarchy. The Washington alibi was critical. By the time the king and queen landed on May 6th, the revolution was already complete, an accomplished fact etched into the historical record. The long campaign to erase Diana had not ended with noisy public protests, but with a quiet, legally watertight administrative strike. Though the administrative apparatus of the British state is seldom seen as a tool of conflict, in the hands of Prince William and Princess Anne, it became a precision instrument for institutional correction. While the physical reinstallation of Diana's portrait in the Hall of Matriarchs was the public gesture, the real foundation of the operation was a sophisticated legal strategy involving the Royal Collection Trust and the Duchy of Cornwall. Executed with the clinical efficiency of a corporate takeover, this maneuver ensured that Diana's return was not merely symbolic, but a binding institutional reality that neither the king nor the queen consort could easily reverse. The centerpiece of this legal trap was the reclassification of the Windsor Gallery spaces. On May 4, 2026, acting under temporary authority granted by the Regency Act, the Councillors of State issued the Sovereign Heritage Protection Mandate. Quietly filed in the Lord Chamberlain's private archives, the directive redesignated the EDC, Hall of Matriarchs, as a constitutional education site rather than a private residential gallery. This shift removed the portrait from the direct control of the king's personal household staff and placed it under the authority of professional curators bound by the National Heritage Acts. Any future attempt to remove it would now require formal impact assessments and public justification before the board of the Royal Collection Trust. For King Charles to order its removal, he would effectively have to argue that the mother of the future king and grandmother of the next had no legitimate place in the royal lineage, a politically impossible position. It was checkmate achieved through deep institutional understanding. Prince William did not appeal to his father's emotions. Instead, he targeted the king's well-known commitment to historical preservation and administrative propriety. Princess Anne's role during the critical 48-hour window was to immobilize the palace's human infrastructure. As master of the household, she held the power to issue emergency standing orders to all security and domestic staff. At 9:00 a.m. on May 5th, she activated a protocol known as Silence of the Sovereign, normally reserved for periods of national mourning or security crises, which severely restricted internal communications to the royal flight. When Queen Tadati, Camilla tried to contact her private secretaries via secure satellite link from Washington, she was informed that the palace was undergoing a comprehensive systems security refresh. The isolation was absolute. Simultaneously, the financial leverage of the Duchy of Cornwall was brought into play. A substantial endowment was transferred from the duchy to the Royal Collection Trust, dedicated specifically to the perpetual maintenance of the Diana Gallery. This converted the portrait into a financially endowed asset. Removing it would require returning millions in funds and automatically trigger audits and reports to the Treasury. William had built a formidable bureaucratic and financial shield around his mother's image. While these legal and financial defenses were being erected, a parallel operation unfolded in the royal archives. Princess Anne authorized the retrieval and secure relocation of original diaries and correspondence from 1996 and 1997, documents long suppressed, to a high-security vault in Windsor Castle's Round Tower. The implicit message to the king was unmistakable. The portrait was only the opening move. Any challenge to the new institutional reality would open the archives as the next battlefield. The psychological timing was impeccable. By May 6th, King Charles had enjoyed 4 days on the world stage as a respected global elder statesman, riding a peak in public approval. The plotters understood that a man at the height of his success had the most to lose from a damaging scandal. They presented him with a stark choice upon his return: accept a new power-sharing arrangement with his son and sister, or face a domestic crisis that would overshadow and tarnish his Washington triumph. The terse 5-word exchange between Princess Anne and Queen Camilla represented the climax of years of underlying tension. When Anne declared that this was what Diana deserved, she spoke for a significant faction within the royal household, one that believed the institution had lost its moral bearings in its efforts to elevate the queen consort at the expense of the past. Many staff members, still loyal to the legacy of the late Queen Elizabeth II, quietly supported this view. Motionless, the palace staff stood frozen as the queen consort demanded action. They were not defying her, they were obeying the new legal directives issued by the Princess Royal. By the afternoon of May 6th, the shift in power had become visible in even the smallest details. The internal palace directory, which had previously listed the Queen Consort's office as the lead authority on heritage and branding matters, was quietly updated. Her staff discovered that their access codes to the royal archives had been revoked. The strategic heart of the monarchy had moved from the king's private study to the offices of the Prince of Wales. The Washington trip had served as the perfect alibi. It had drawn the king and queen consort out of the country, allowing the heirs to reclaim the machinery of state. Heirs who had never forgotten the image of a 5-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin. As the king sat in his study that afternoon, surrounded by the unnatural silence of a palace that no longer answered to his command, he understood that the visual language of the monarchy had been seized. Diana was no longer just back on the wall, she had returned to the apprenti, very DNA of the institution. The coup was clinical, legal, and irreversible. The era of unchecked authority for Queen Camilla had reached its silent conclusion, and the reign of the future had begun under the long shadow of the past. The strategic isolation of Queen Camilla was more than geographical. It was a complete, administrative blackout designed to strip her of her role as gatekeeper of the royal image. For over a decade, she had carefully controlled the monarchy's visual narrative, ensuring that any reference to the previous Princess of Wales remained buried in the margins of history. This control had been enforced through a network of loyalists in the Palace Communications Department and the Lord Chamberlain's office. However, during the 96-hour Washington state visit, Prince William and Princess Anne carried out a systematic purge of that influence, what insiders referred to as the institutional reset. The operation began at 11:02 on May 4th. While the king was engaged in high-level talks at the Pentagon, executive orders were issued from the Prince of Wales's office. These orders immediately suspended the security clearances of 4 senior press officers who had been central to managing Camilla's public narrative. They were told their positions were under review as part of a new efficiency drive approved by the Councillors of State. In their place, Prince William installed a team of strategic advisors who had previously served in the private office of the late Queen Elizabeth II, individuals whose loyalty belonged to the continuity of the crown, not the personal interests of the consort. This personnel shift enabled the swift declassification of key assets. By 14 that same day, the royal household's digital asset management system was updated. Hundreds of high-resolution images of Princess Diana, previously restricted or marked for internal use only, were moved into active press kits. The treaty, digital erasure of Diana, was undone in seconds. The human impact was most evident within the Windsor staff hierarchy. Princess Anne, exercising her authority as master of the household, held one-on-one briefings with senior curators of the royal collection. She made it clear that the restoration of the Diana portrait was not a request, but a formal requirement of state. Any hesitation was met with a firm reminder of their oath to the sovereign and the line of succession. The silence that greeted Camilla upon her return was the result of this intense psychological realignment. Staff had been convinced that opposing the portrait meant opposing the future of the monarchy itself. By the evening of May 5th, the transformation was complete. When the Queen Consort's private secretary tried to send a briefing note about the success of the New York engagements, the encrypted channel had been redirected to a secure server at Kensington Palace. For the first time since her marriage to Charles, Camilla was entirely blind to the internal workings of the household. She operated in a vacuum, unaware that her institutional power base had already been dismantled. The final blow came through a physical change in the royal inventory. Under the direction of the Princess of Wales, Catherine, a specialized team entered the jewelry vaults at Buckingham Palace. Authorized by the Councillors of State, they retrieved several significant pieces of Spencer heritage and items from the late Queen's personal collection that Diana had famously worn. These pieces were transferred to Adelaide Cottage under a new long-term loan agreement. This ensured that the physical symbols of royal matriarchy now rested with the future Queen, effectively bypassing the current. When the confrontation unfolded on the morning of May 6th, Queen Camilla realized her orders no longer carried any authority. She was shouting at a machine that had been quietly reprogrammed. The guards stayed at their posts. The curators continued their work, and even the king's own secretaries refused to intervene. The center of power had shifted decisively. The Washington visit had done far more than provide a window for Diana's portrait to be restored at Windsor. It had served as cover for the complete dismantling of the shadow network Camilla had spent over 2 decades building. The institution had corrected itself, and the Queen Consort was left as a mere spectator in what had once been her domain. The most secretive and potentially explosive element of this Windsor coup remains the contents of the sealed diplomatic pouch delivered from the Oval Office to London on May 5, 2026. While the public saw the return of Diana's portrait as a symbolic declaration, the real reason for King Charles's sudden and uncharacteristic capitulation to his son's demands lies within this classified dossier. Known among senior intelligence figures as the Paris Intercepts, the file contains 30 years of American satellite surveillance and signals intelligence that had never before been shared with the British Crown. According to sources within the State Department, it includes raw, unedited data from the night of August 31, 1997. For decades, the official account of the Alma Tunnel tragedy rested on the findings of the Paget inquiry, which emphasized driver error and paparazzi pressure. The American dossier, however, offers a far more complex picture, drawing on high-altitude thermal imaging and intercepted French emergency services communications captured by NSA listening posts, Prince William's timing proved strategically masterful. He understood that the Americans held the final pieces of the puzzle surrounding his mother's death. Working in coordination with the Princess Royal and drawing on his growing ties within the U.S. intelligence community, William ensured the file reached his father at the moment of maximum leverage. Had the king resisted the restoration of Diana's image, he risked the dossier being leaked to a global audience already energized by the success of the Washington state visit. Witnesses reported that after the brief and icy encounter with Camilla, King Charles spent nearly 3 hours alone with the dossier. His prolonged silence signaled that the information it contained had made any defense of the existing order untenable. He was forced to choose between protecting Camilla's personal reputation and preserving the historical integrity of the monarchy. By remaining silent, he effectively acknowledged that the long era of erasing Diana's shadow had ended. The dossier reportedly also contains transcripts of private communications between senior palace officials and external PR consultants from the late 1990s, outlining a systematic campaign to rehabilitate Camilla's image by diminishing Diana's legacy. Should these documents ever surface, they would reveal the cold, calculated machinery that William and Anne have now dismantled. The file functions as a nuclear deterrent. As long as Diana's portrait remains in the Hall of Matriarchs and her legacy assets are restored to the Prince and Princess of Wales, the dossier stays a private state secret. Any challenge to this new status quo could threaten the throne itself. Princess Anne played a pivotal bridging role in this intelligence-driven maneuver. With her extensive diplomatic experience and high-level security clearances, she verified the authenticity of the American material and personally briefed the king on the legal and reputational consequences of its contents. Her terse, 5-word statement to Camilla carried the full weight of this hidden truth. She was not merely speaking about a painting, she was addressing the historical reckoning that the American dossier had finally made inevitable. By the evening of May 6, 2026, the Washington file had been transferred to a high-security digital vault under the control of the Prince of Wales. The king is said to have signed a non-disclosure agreement binding the sovereign's office to the new heritage protocols. The power dynamic within the House of Windsor has been permanently inverted. While Charles remains the figurehead, the strategic direction of the monarchy is now guided by the unvarnished evidence of the past. The restored portrait stands as the visible emblem of a victory secured in the shadows of the Oval Office, one that ensures the truth of 1997 can never again be buried. The final phase of the Windsor coup emerged from the shadows of administrative maneuvering into full public view. By the evening of May 6, 2026, what had once been a discreet operation within the high-security corridors of the palace had become a visible and tangible transformation of the British monarchy's identity. The conclusion of Operation Motherland was executed through a series of calculated steps intended to ensure that the restoration of the Princess of Wales was not merely symbolic or temporary, but a permanent reset for the future of the institution. The first clear sign of this lasting shift came with the immediate update to the official royal website and digital court circular. Bypassing the traditional approval process of the Queen Consort, the Royal Collection Trust uploaded a virtual tour of the Hall of Matriarchs. At its center was the portrait of Diana, accompanied by a revised biographical text that highlighted her role as the mother of the future king and her lasting influence on the modernization of the monarchy. This digital record ensured that millions worldwide quickly witnessed the restoration, making any reversal a matter of global public documentation. At the same time, the physical security of the portrait was elevated to the same level as the crown jewels. Princess Anne authorized the installation of a state-of-the-art, vibration-sensitive alarm system and a permanent 24-hour ceremonial guard. The measures were designed not only to protect the artwork, but to send an unambiguous signal throughout the royal household. The portrait was now a protected asset of the state. The guards reported directly to the master of the household, deliberately bypassing the king's private secretaries and the queen consort's staff. In the private quarters, the sense of capitulation was complete. Queen Camilla, recognizing that the king would not issue a counter-order, began a strategic withdrawal. Sources close to her office reported the cancellation of several upcoming solo engagements linked to the royal collection, officially attributed to a need for rest following the American state visit. In reality, she had been effectively stripped of her influence over the palace's visual and historical narrative. The coordinated actions of William and Anne had successfully boxed her out. While she retained the title of Queen Consort, she had been moved to the margins of the institution's strategic center. The final act of the operation belonged to the Prince and Princess of Wales. As the sun set over Windsor Castle on May 6th, William and Catherine were photographed walking the castle grounds. For the first time in decades, Catherine wore the iconic Spencer tiara, a piece not seen on a senior royal since 1997. The image served as powerful visual confirmation of the transfer of legacy. The treasures of the past had been returned to the heirs of the future. King Charles's silence throughout the evening was widely interpreted by constitutional observers as a tacit agreement with his son. By accepting the contents of the Washington file and the restoration of the portrait, Charles had protected his own reign from a potentially devastating scandal. He had chosen to be remembered as the king who reconciled the past and the future, even if it meant curtailing his wife's authority. The Washington alibi offered the king a convenient diplomatic cover, allowing him to frame the changes as a necessary evolution of the monarchy following the historic American visit. As of midnight on May 7, 2026, the House of Windsor had been transformed. The portrait of Diana, Princess of Wales, now holds its central position alongside that of Queen Elizabeth II. The era of Camilla's influence has ended in a quiet but decisive administrative checkmate. The institution has corrected its course, and the visual language of the monarchy has been restored to its rightful heirs. The coup is complete. The truth hangs on the wall, and the future of the monarchy now rests securely in the hands of the son who never forgot.